A racist farmer, thought to be dead and buried, has returned from the grave with a chilling message that's sending shockwaves through the community. He claims to have seen the afterlife, and what he's warning about is enough to make your skin crawl, a reckoning for anyone who clings to hate. But how can this be real? Is he telling the truth, or is something far darker at play here? His return raises more questions than answers, leaving everyone wondering, what did he truly experience and what's coming next?
In a world more divided than ever, where fear and anger often fuel our perceptions of one another, it's hard to know who or what to trust. The lines between right and wrong seem to blur more every day, and many of us struggle to find common ground. In fact, sometimes it feels like the very fabric of society is tearing apart at the seams. But what happens when someone who spent their life consumed by hatred suddenly returns with a message for the world? A man who lives steeped in darkness, a man who once harbored some of the deepest prejudices imaginable, claims that he saw Jesus, was sent back, and now warns of the rise of the Antichrist. This is a story that will make you rethink everything. What could this haunting tale mean for all of us, no matter where we stand? In this video, we'll dive deep into the unbelievable story of Elliot Harper, a man whose life represents some of the darkest ideologies imaginable. His return is one that could change everything we think we know about faith, humanity, and the future. For many, it might be a wake-up call, a chance to reconsider how we view the world, each other, and what really matters in the end. Elliot Harper was born in the mid-1960s in the heart of the rural Midwest, a place where time seems to slow down and life moves at a different pace. His family farm had been passed down through generations, and to Elliot, it wasn't just a piece of land. It was his entire identity. He wasn't just a farmer. He was a product of that land. His sense of purpose was tied to it, and he didn't think there was any reason to leave. The land was his legacy, and nothing in the world could take that from him. But as the years went on, the world around him began to change. And with change came fear. Elliot's parents, Tom and Martha, were hardworking, conservative people who lived by a strict set of values. They raised Elliot with the belief that life wasn't about compromise. It was about survival, loyalty, and sticking to traditions that had always worked for their family. Tom, his father, was a no-nonsense, gruff man who didn't tolerate weakness or softness. "The world's changing too fast," he'd say with a shake of his head as he watched the evening news. "People don't know the value of hard work anymore. They're always looking for handouts." To Tom, the world outside their small town was full of strangers who didn't share their values, who didn't understand the sacrifices that had been made to build a life. And Elliot believed every word. But could these beliefs be what kept Elliot from truly living? As Elliot grew older, his worldview became more rigid. He wasn't just a young man with opinions. He became someone who truly believed that the outside world was a threat to everything he knew and loved. School did little to challenge his beliefs. The town he grew up in was mostly homogeneous. Everyone shared the same traditions, the same ideas, and for Elliot, there was no reason to question anything. Academics didn't interest him. The farm was his focus. While other kids in his town dreamed of leaving for the city or going off to college, Elliot had no interest in escaping. "The farm's all we need," he'd say to anyone who questioned his future. For him, life had a simple rhythm: work the land, preserve the legacy, and make sure no one tried to take it away. But as time passed, Elliot's world began to shrink. The farm, once a symbol of pride and stability, became a source of frustration. Bad weather, fluctuating crop prices, and mounting debt made survival harder. And with each new challenge, Elliot's pride and bitterness grew. Instead of reaching out for help, he pushed people away. He blamed the government, the changing demographics of the country, and anyone who didn't look or think like him for what he saw as the erosion of traditional values. Could it be that this anger was starting to poison every part of his life? Elliot's marriage to Linda, a local woman who had once shared his values, began to crack under the strain of his constant bitterness. Linda grew weary of Elliot's refusal to see beyond his own grievances. She tried to reason with him, tried to remind him that not everything in life had to be a fight. "Not everything's a battle, Elliot," she would say during their arguments. But Elliot refused to hear it. To him, her perspective wasn't wisdom. It was a weakness, a betrayal of the strength he believed was necessary to survive in a world that was changing too fast. Eventually, Linda left him, taking their children, Ben and Sarah, with her. Could this be the breaking point for Elliot? Was he about to lose everything? Alone on the farm, Elliot's isolation deepened. He threw himself into his work, but more and more, his frustrations found a home in his heart. He avoided town, only going into local shops when absolutely necessary. And when he did interact with others, it was with a scowl or a sharp comment. Neighbors who tried to reach out were met with cold, curt responses, or worse, outright hostility. Over time, Elliot earned a reputation as the town's curmudgeon, a man to avoid. But as he buried himself further in his bitterness, Elliot started to seek solace in other places. He embraced the echo chambers of the internet and conservative radio shows, where voices validated his fears and anger. These voices told him what he wanted to hear, that the world was against people like him, that his suspicions were justified, and that his way of life was under attack. What would happen when this isolation became his only companion? Would it push him into something far darker? By the time Elliot reached 55, his body had been worn down by years of hard labor. Aching joints, weathered skin, and a persistent pain in his back that he ignored. But it wasn't just his body that had been scarred. The deeper wounds were in his heart and soul, where decades of bitterness had taken root. Elliot wasn't lost in his mind. He was standing firm against a world that no longer seemed to care about people like him. He didn't need anyone else. He had survived alone, and he would continue to do so. But what if everything Elliot had come to believe was about to be challenged? What if something extraordinary, something beyond his comprehension, was waiting for him? Elliot Harper's life had been one of pain, pride, and missed opportunities. He had been given chances to change, to let go of his anger, to embrace love and understanding over fear. But he had rejected them all. He clung to the beliefs and values that had shaped him for so long. To him, they were truths that couldn't be questioned, realities that didn't need to be challenged. But sometimes it takes something beyond the ordinary to shake a person to their core, something extraordinary. And Elliot's story was about to take a turn that no one, including Elliot, could have seen coming. As Elliot continued his life on the farm, with his anger and pride his only companions, a strange event would change everything. Something that would force him to look beyond his bitterness, beyond the life he had clung to so tightly. It was going to be a revelation that could alter the course of everything he thought he knew. And it all started with a message from beyond the grave. Elliot Harper's death was sudden, striking without warning on what should have been just another ordinary day. At 55, his body had already endured years of grueling farm work, and it showed in every aching joint and weathered muscle. His back, always tight from years of bending and lifting, ached constantly, and his knees groaned with each step. His hands were rough and scarred, the calluses a permanent reminder of decades spent working the land. But Elliot, stubborn as they come, refused to acknowledge these signs of aging. To him, hard work wasn't just something he did. It was who he was. It gave his life meaning, and without it, he often wondered what he would have left. His work was the one thing that kept him going, especially in a world that seemed to offer him little else. That morning, like most mornings, the summer air was thick with humidity, promising another stifling day ahead. Elliot woke before the sun, as always. and shuffled into the kitchen to brew his coffee. The bitter taste of the coffee had become as familiar to him as the sunrise itself, as much a part of his morning routine as the farm work that awaited him. He stood by the window, sipping his hot drink, staring out at the fields that stretched endlessly before him. But today, something felt different. The view no longer brought him comfort. Instead, it filled him with a sense of dread, worries that seemed to weigh him down more each day. The crops were always unpredictable, the debts piling up with no clear way to pay them off. Would this season's yield be enough? Would he ever get ahead of the mounting bills that hung over him like an ever-approaching storm? He moved through his chores with a quiet determination, feeding the chickens, checking on the cows, and starting the tedious task of repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by the previous storm. The sun beat down relentlessly, the work grueling under the heavy summer heat. But Elliot didn't stop. He powered through it all, the aches in his bones, the tightness in his chest, even the dizziness that began to creep in. At first, he brushed it off. Maybe it was just indigestion or the heat. He'd been pushing his body hard for years, after all. But as the morning wore on, the discomfort began to grow. What started as a mild sensation in his chest soon became something much more intense, a suffocating pressure that gripped his heart. Elliot paused, leaning against the freshly hammered fence post, sweat dripping down his face. His hands trembled as he wiped his brow, his vision blurring. A wave of dizziness hit him so suddenly that he stumbled for a moment. Could it be something serious this time? Or was it just the exhaustion catching up with him? But even as he tried to shake it off, the feeling only intensified, radiating down his left arm in a way that made his knees feel weak. It was as if something was tightening around his chest, squeezing his heart. The world around him started to tilt. Elliot sank to his knees, his body giving out beneath him. His breath came in desperate gasps as he tried to draw in air, but it felt as though the air itself had thinned, making it harder to breathe. The more he struggled, the more distant everything became. The sounds of the farm, the chirping birds, the rustling of the trees, faded into an eerie silence. His heart, which had always beat with the rhythm of survival, faltered. The familiar drumbeat slowed, grew erratic, and then, just like that, it stopped. And with that final shocking silence, Elliot Harper's world came to an end. But what happened next was far beyond anything Elliot could have ever imagined. When he opened his eyes again, nothing was familiar. The farm, the chickens, the cows, the aching body he had spent his life maintaining, all of it was gone. Instead, he found himself standing in a space that was both infinite and intimate, unlike anything he had ever seen or felt. It was as if reality itself had unraveled. There were no walls, no boundaries, just light and shadow stretching out in every direction. The air, or whatever passed for air in this strange place, was thick with an indescribable energy. It hummed deep within him, resonating in a way that defied words. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was something deeper, something that spoke directly to his soul. He felt weightless, yet at the same time, grounded, as if an invisible force was pulling him forward. It wasn't just a feeling. It was as if the very fabric of this strange place was guiding him towards something, urging him onwards. In the distance, he saw a light, bright, warm, almost too beautiful to look at. Yet somehow, it was gentle on the eyes. It called to him, a light so alive that it felt like more than just light. It was love. Could this be the answer he'd been searching for all his life? The warmth radiating from it was so comforting that he couldn't help but move toward it, drawn by something beyond his understanding. As he drew closer to the light, memories began to flood his mind, not in any logical order, but as a dizzying cascade of vivid, fragmented moments. He saw himself as a child again, sitting at the dinner table, listening to his father's stern warnings about trusting people who were different. He saw the coldness that had grown between him and Linda, his wife, the distance that had seeped into their marriage over the years. He saw the hurt in his children's eyes as they grew older and started pulling away from him. Every neighbor he had alienated with his bitterness, every friend he had pushed away with his refusal to open up. They all came rushing back to him in painful clarity. Each of these moments hit him like a sharp sting, replaying themselves in vivid, agonizing detail. Every unkind word, every harsh judgment, every time he chose bitterness instead of compassion, came back to haunt him. He tried to look away, but there was no escape. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore. For the first time in his life, he didn't see himself as a victim of the world or as someone who had been wronged. Instead, he saw a man who had chosen to turn away from love, a man who had closed himself off from the very thing that could have healed him. The realization hit him hard, and with it came a wave of crushing shame, a weight so heavy that it seemed like it might crush him under its pressure. And then, the voices began. At first, they were barely more than whispers, faint and distant, like a breeze passing through the trees. But as Elliot drew closer to the light, the whispers grew clearer, more distinct. They weren't angry, accusing voices. They didn't scream or condemn. Instead, they spoke in gentle, soothing tones, truths that seemed to pierce the very fabric of his being. They didn't accuse him of anything. They simply showed him the truth of his life. They spoke of love, unity, and healing. They spoke of the pain he had caused, not just to others, but to himself as well. As the voices continued, Elliot began to feel something stir within him, something deep, something long buried. It was a longing, an ache to make things right. But there was no time to dwell on it, no time to try to fix everything. The truth was too late to run from. It was here, now, and he had no choice but to face it. As he reached the light, a figure emerged from within it. At first, all he could make out was a silhouette, but as it grew clearer, there was no mistaking who it was. It was Jesus. His presence was overwhelming, not just in its radiance, but in the love and power that emanated from him. The love was so pure, so intense, that it filled every part of Elliot's being. In that moment, he fell to his knees, unable to stand in the face of such overwhelming divinity. The fear, the awe, the love. It was too much for him to bear, and yet, at the same time, it was the most comforting thing he had ever felt. For what felt like an eternity, Jesus said nothing. He simply looked at Elliot, his gaze filled with a sorrow so deep that it seemed to come from the very heart of the universe. Elliot wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain himself. But no words came. The justifications that once seemed so important now felt completely meaningless in the face of such love. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, but he didn't know where to start. Finally, Jesus spoke. His voice was gentle but firm, filled with compassion that almost felt too much to bear. He spoke of Elliot's life, not to condemn him, but to show him the ways he had fallen short of the love he was meant to give. And with those words, Elliot understood, deep within his soul, the truth of his life and the love that had always been there, waiting for him to accept it. It was a truth that would change him forever. Elliot Harper stood there, paralyzed by a clarity that shattered his soul. It was as though every mistake he had ever made, every harsh word he had spoken, every selfish decision he'd thought was harmless, was now unfolding before him in a flood of painful truth. He saw the ways his bitterness and pride had hurt others, deeply, irreparably. It was a moment of pure self-condemnation. But as his mind swirled in shame, something unexpected happened. Jesus didn't meet him with anger. Instead, he spoke words of unimaginable hope, words that shattered the weight of Elliot's guilt. "There's still a chance for you," Jesus said, his voice carrying the warmth of redemption, even for someone like Elliot who had lost his way. The realization that there was a possibility for him to be redeemed, for him to make things right, was almost more than Elliot could bear. But Jesus didn't stop there. His words weren't just about hope. They carried something deeper, something far more disturbing. In the middle of this divine encounter, he shared with Elliot a vision that would haunt him forever. It was a glimpse into the future, a chilling prophecy that would unravel everything Elliot thought he knew about the world. What Elliot was about to see would shake him to the core. The vision wasn't one of immediate destruction, chaos, or an epic battle between good and evil. No, this vision was far more terrifying because it was subtle. It showed the rise of a figure so powerful, so deceptive, that it would shake the very foundation of humanity. The Antichrist would not come with fire or fury. He would come as a savior, an answer to humanity's deepest fears. A man who would rise to power not through violence, but through the manipulation of the human heart. Elliot saw terrifying images. He saw a world in chaos, nations at war, economies collapsing, and disasters ravaging the planet. Into this desperation, a man would rise, promising peace, unity, and hope in a time of crisis. He wasn't a conqueror in the traditional sense. He didn't seize power by force. Instead, he seduced the world with his charm, his promises of a better future. Crowds cheered for him, nations bowed to him, and the world, in its desperate search for answers, abandoned its faith, trusting instead in the promises of a man who was, in reality, leading them down a dark path. Elliot felt a surge of dread in his chest. This vision wasn't meant for him alone. He had been shown this future for a reason. He was meant to warn others. Jesus made it clear. It was up to Elliot to share this terrifying truth with anyone who would listen, to open their eyes to the danger that lay ahead and help them see through the deception before it was too late. Elliot longed to remain in that divine space, to stay in the warmth and peace of Jesus' presence. It was the first time in his life he truly understood what love and forgiveness felt like. The clarity, the peace, it was unlike anything he had ever known. But there was no time to stay. Jesus' gaze was filled with both sorrow and hope as he sent Elliot back. "You must go," Jesus said, his voice echoing in Elliot's mind. "Share what you've seen and help others see." When Elliot woke, the world around him seemed unchanged, yet everything was different. He felt as if the very ground beneath him had shifted, and yet his body, his soul, had been reborn. The pain that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a profound sense of purpose. The air in his lungs felt different, heavier, but in a good way, as if he was breathing in a new life, a second chance. He wasn't just alive, he was alive for a reason. Days passed, and Elliot couldn't shake the weight of what he had seen. He began sharing the vision with anyone who would listen, describing the rise of the Antichrist. What terrified him most wasn't the world-ending destruction. It wasn't the wars, or the plagues, or the disasters. It was the fact that the Antichrist would rise quietly, almost invisibly, offering a world that seemed too good to be true. People would fall for it without realizing they were being deceived. At first, the Antichrist would appear as a beacon of hope, a man who promised peace in a world that had known nothing but turmoil. He would not come as a villain, but as a savior, the kind of leader everyone was searching for. His ideas would seem practical, his words soothing. He would unite warring nations, solve economic crises, and heal divisions. He would restore order, bring people together, and offer hope. It would seem like a dream come true. But Elliot knew better. This man was no savior. The world would be too blinded by their desperation to see the truth. The most terrifying part? The Antichrist wouldn't force his power on anyone. Instead, he would make people want to give it to him. Slowly, subtly, he would gain influence through the choices of the people, through their willingness to surrender their faith for a false sense of security. Eliot saw the world change in small, almost imperceptible ways. Religious institutions would begin to shift, aligning their teachings with the Antichrist message. Those who resisted would be called backward, intolerant. Symbols of faith would be removed, crosses torn down, and replaced with a new symbol that promised unity. People would accept the changes without question, all in the name of peace and unity. The most horrifying part of Eliot's vision came when he saw the mark of the beast. At first, it seemed harmless, just a way to make life easier. The mark was introduced as an identification system, a way to access food, medicine, jobs, and more. It was voluntary at first. People could choose to accept it, and many would. It seemed like a small price to pay for safety and prosperity. But over time, the mark would become mandatory. Those who refused it would be ostracized, hunted down, and silenced. Eliot watched as people eagerly accepted the mark, unaware of the true cost. They thought it was just a convenience, a way to improve their lives. But in doing so, they unknowingly sealed their fate. They aligned themselves with the Antichrist, turning away from God in exchange for temporary peace and security. The deception was so complete, so all-encompassing, that even the faithful were vulnerable. The Antichrist deception would be so subtle, so powerful, that no one would see it coming until it was too late. Throughout the vision, Jesus' voice remained a constant presence in Eliot's mind. His words were calm, but they carried weight. The Antichrist will not appear as your enemy, Jesus said. He will appear as your savior. And Eliot saw it. He saw how the Antichrist would exploit humanity's greatest fears, fear of chaos, of division, of loss. He would offer the answers people were desperate to hear, and they would flock to him, not realizing they were walking into darkness. Eliot also saw those who resisted, the few who refused to take the mark, the brave souls who stood firm in their faith. They were persecuted, isolated, and ridiculed, but their faith remained unshaken. They went into hiding, but even in the darkness, they carried the light of truth. Eliot watched them, awed by their strength. They were the last line of defense against the growing darkness. When the vision finally ended, Eliot found himself once again in the presence of Jesus. The love in Jesus' eyes was overwhelming. Eliot fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You have been shown this, not to live in fear," Jesus said, his voice filled with compassion, "but to share the truth. Warn them, teach them to recognize the signs, to seek my word, and to trust in my light." The weight of the responsibility was immense. Eliot knew he could no longer live the way he had before. He had been given a mission that would be difficult and full of challenges. He didn't know how he would spread this message, or if anyone would believe him. But there was no turning back. He had been spared for a reason. The time to act was now. Eliot Harper's return to life wasn't some grand victory or moment of triumph. No, it was something much deeper, far more humbling. Lying in the dirt where he had collapsed, he felt the weight of his experience pressing on him, a burden far heavier than any physical pain he had ever known. Sure, he was alive, but he wasn't the same man who had started that day. The vision of Jesus, the warning about the Antichrist, and the sudden, brutal clarity of his own failings had changed him in ways he couldn't fully grasp. Now, as he lay there, the next step seemed almost impossible, living differently and sharing the truth he had been given, a truth that felt both like a gift and a responsibility. But how could he possibly move forward with all this weighing on him? The first few days after his awakening were the hardest. Elliot felt completely overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened to him. His mind was spinning with thoughts about the vision, the lessons, the responsibility that seemed to hang over him like a dark cloud. He was confused, lost, and, if he was being honest, scared out of his mind. It was so tempting to retreat back into the quiet life of the farm, to bury his head in the sand, and pretend that none of this had ever happened. Yet each time he tried to escape, the memory of Jesus' gaze and the sound of his voice echoed in his mind. Share what you have seen and help others see. Those words haunted him relentlessly, a call to action he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried. So, he didn't ignore it. He knew deep down that he had been spared for a reason, not for himself, but for something far greater. He was alive because he had a mission to fulfill, and that mission was bigger than any fear or mistake. The weight of that truth was suffocating, but it was also pushing him forward. His first step, though small, was to pray. It felt awkward, like he was stepping into a new world, but he knew it was something he had to do. He had been away from his faith for years, so the words felt foreign on his lips. "Lord," he said, his voice trembling with uncertainty, "I don't know where to start. I don't even know how to talk to you, but I know I need you." It wasn't a beautiful prayer, not the kind you'd hear in a church sermon, but it was honest. It was real, and it marked the beginning of his transformation. Could something as simple as a prayer really change everything? As time passed, Elliot began to pray regularly. It wasn't easy. Sometimes it felt silly or strange, but each time he said those words, each time he took a moment to speak to God, there was a small flicker of peace. It wasn't much, just a small whisper of comfort in the chaos of his life. But it was there. It was something he hadn't felt in years, and with each prayer, he began to feel more alive in a way that wasn't tied to his physical survival, but to his soul, his purpose. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back to who he had been. Rebuilding his life wasn't just about finding peace for himself. It was also about repairing the relationships he had shattered over the years. His neighbors, most of whom he had pushed away with his anger and bitterness, were a good place to start. He wasn't sure how they'd respond, but he knew he had to try. So he took a deep breath and walked to their porches, or caught them in town. His apologies were simple but heartfelt. "I've been wrong about a lot of things," he confessed to one neighbor, his voice thick with regret. "I let my anger get the best of me, and I hurt people. I didn't have the right to judge anyone." Some of them were taken aback by the sudden change in him. Others were skeptical, but a few saw the sincerity in his eyes and offered a cautious forgiveness. But repairing his relationship with his children, Ben and Sarah, was another battle entirely. Their visits had become rare, and the emotional distance between them was a chasm Elliot didn't know how to cross. He had to face the painful reality. He had failed them, but he wasn't going to let that failure define the rest of his life. His first step was to call them, even though it felt like the hardest thing he'd ever done. The conversations were awkward at first, full of silences, unspoken words, and uncomfortable pauses. But Elliot didn't give up. He pressed on, knowing that he had to take responsibility for the damage he had caused. "I know I wasn't the father you needed," he said to Sarah one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "I pushed you away because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me." To his surprise, Sarah agreed to meet him for coffee, a small but meaningful step in the right direction. Could he ever rebuild the trust they had lost? Or was it too late? Reconnecting with Linda, his ex-wife, was by far the hardest. Linda had been the one who had borne the brunt of Elliot's anger, his bitterness, and his emotional neglect for years. The scars between them were deep, and when he reached out, she was understandably cautious. "I don't know what you're trying to do, Elliot," she said, her voice guarded and tired. "But if this is just about guilt, it's going to take more than an apology to fix what you've broken." Her words cut to the heart. She was right. He couldn't undo the damage. But he didn't give up. He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. Instead, he listened to her pain, acknowledged it, and told her about the experience that had changed his life. Whether she believed him or not didn't matter. He just needed her to know that he was trying to make things right, to heal what had been broken. As Elliot worked on mending his relationships, he knew he had to share his story with others. This would be the hardest part of all. How could he, someone who had spent so many years filled with pride, anger, and regret, speak about love and redemption? How could he possibly be the one to warn others? He struggled with the feeling that he wasn't good enough, that his past sins would always be a barrier. But despite his doubts, Elliot knew that his message was important, maybe the most important message he had ever carried. So he began writing down everything he could remember: the vision, the lessons, the warning about the Antichrist, everything. His notes were messy, filled with scribbles and crossed out words, but they were his foundation, his starting point. Eventually, Elliot felt ready to speak about what had happened. He approached his local church and asked to speak with the pastor, Reverend Allen. The pastor listened to his story with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You've been through something powerful, Elliot," he said, "but sharing this will take more than just conviction. It will take courage." Elliot nodded. He knew that, but he also knew he couldn't keep this to himself. It stung, but Elliot didn't back down. What choice did he have? He knew the importance of his message, even if others didn't see it. "I'm not special," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I'm just a man who was given a second chance, and now I'm here to share a warning. I don't expect you to believe me right away, but I do hope you'll think about what I'm saying. This isn't about me, it's about all of us. I'm just one voice, but the message is much bigger." Despite the skepticism and the growing resistance, Elliot pressed on. The stakes were too high to stop now. He tailored his talks, not just as warnings, but as calls to action. He urged people to take ownership of their faith, to question the world around them, and to prepare for the uncertain days ahead. "Discernment is the key," he would often say. "You need to be able to see through the lies. The Antichrist won't come with fire and brimstone. He'll come wrapped in promises that seem too good to be true, and they will be." But Elliot's message went beyond just identifying the Antichrist. He wanted to teach people how to prepare for his arrival, not by hoarding supplies or focusing solely on apocalyptic events, but by building stronger foundations. He urged his listeners to focus on strengthening their faith, their character, and their resolve. He wanted them to stand firm when the world seemed to crumble. He asked them to examine their lives with uncomfortable but necessary questions. Do you love your neighbor, even when it's hard? Do you seek the truth, even when it makes you uncomfortable? Do you trust in God's promises, even when the world gives you easier, more convenient answers? These questions weren't just for philosophical pondering. They were the heart of Elliot's message. They forced people to confront their own values and beliefs. And in doing so, Elliot knew he was planting seeds that would eventually grow into something much larger. One of Elliot's toughest challenges wasn't just getting people to listen. It was overcoming the division and mistrust that had infected society. He saw how these fractures, whether based on race, politics, religion, or class, were the very cracks the Antichrist would exploit. The enemy would prey on humanity's anger and fear, offering a solution that promised unity. But it would only lead to control and manipulation. Could unity really heal the world? Or was it all a lie? Eliot asked. We're tearing ourselves apart, he would say, his voice thick with emotion. And when the Antichrist comes, he'll offer a way to put everything back together. But it won't be real unity. It will be manipulation. It will be controlled. For Eliot, the call for unity wasn't about sweeping problems under the rug. He wasn't asking people to ignore their differences. Instead, he urged them to find unity through love, humility, and understanding. The strongest weapon we have against deception is the truth, he reminded his audience. And the truth is that we are all created in God's image. We were meant to love each other, not tear each other apart. We were meant to build bridges, not walls. As Eliot continued on his mission, his reliance on faith grew stronger. He spent hours in prayer, seeking God's guidance and strength, diving deep into Scripture for wisdom and solace. It was in these quiet moments that he found the courage to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed impossibly hard. He began weaving Bible verses into his talks, reminding his listeners that the truth he shared didn't come from him. It came from something far greater. I'm just a man, he would say, but this book is the foundation of everything I'm telling you. Don't take my word for it. Search for yourself. Look to the truth in God's word. As time passed, Eliot's efforts began to bear fruit. People who had once been skeptical started to listen with open hearts, drawn in by his sincerity and unwavering conviction. Communities that had been fractured by distrust began to heal, small step by small step, inspired by Eliot's example of perseverance. Churches that had seen their numbers dwindle began to see a resurgence as individuals sought to strengthen their faith, connect with the truth Eliot was speaking, and prepare for the uncertain future that lay ahead. Was this the turning point? Eliot saw these changes as proof that his mission, though tough, was slowly making a difference. Yet the journey wasn't without its hardships. Eliot still wrestled with the weight of his past, the mistakes he had made, the relationships he had damaged. He had begun the slow process of reconciliation with his children and ex-wife, but healing was not a quick or easy path. He often found himself wondering if he would ever be truly forgiven. Could he ever regain their trust? He fought these doubts with everything he had, remembering the words of Jesus. You have been shown this not to live in fear, but to live in truth. The weight of his past was heavy, but it also became his fuel. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could use the pain to drive his mission forward. There were also moments of crushing loneliness. Despite his best efforts to rebuild the relationships that had once been broken, Eliot often felt the isolation of his past mistakes. Yet, he refused to let these doubts define him. Was this loneliness the price of redemption? Instead, he used it as motivation to keep growing, to keep trying, and to show through his actions that he had truly changed. In the end, Eliot's story wasn't one of perfection, but of perseverance. He was a man who had been given a second chance and chose to use it to serve others, despite the difficulties, despite the obstacles. His life became a living testament to the power of redemption, the importance of vigilance, and the enduring hope that God's light could never be extinguished. As he stood before a crowd one evening, speaking to yet another group of listeners, Eliot paused and reflected on how far he had come. I'm not here to scare you, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm here to remind you that we have a choice. The Antichrist will come, but so will the truth. And when that time comes, it's up to each of us to decide where we stand. Choose wisely. Choose love. Choose God. Eliot Harper's message wasn't just a warning. It was a call to action. It was a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, faith and love could light the way. His journey stood as proof that redemption was always within reach, and his mission became a beacon of hope for a world that desperately needed it. Elliot, however, was not the only one who claimed to have had a face-to-face encounter with God himself. These kinds of extraordinary experiences have been shared by many people throughout history, from those who were on the brink of death to those who were simply looking for meaning in their lives. Each of these encounters carries a unique transformative message, and the individuals involved often find themselves forever changed by what they experienced. So, what happens when someone comes face to face with the divine? What does it mean for their lives, and how do they respond? One such encounter took place in 1985 with Howard Storm, a former atheist and college professor who had a dramatic near-death experience. Storm was hospitalized and gravely ill, and he thought he was going to die. As he slipped away, he described descending into a dark, terrifying place. He found himself surrounded by shadowy figures who seemed to mock and torment him. The atmosphere was oppressive, and Storm thought he was lost for good. Just as he was about to give up, everything changed. He suddenly saw a light in the distance, and from that light came the figure of Jesus, who reached out to him with love and compassion. Jesus not only saved him from the abyss, but also shared deep, profound wisdom that reshaped Storm's life. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a life-altering transformation. Storm came out of that experience with a new purpose: to abandon his former beliefs and dedicate his life to helping others find faith. He eventually became a pastor and shared his testimony widely, spreading the message of redemption he had experienced firsthand. So, what happens when a person encounters Jesus in the afterlife and returns to tell the story? For Mellon Thomas Benedict, the answer is nothing short of miraculous. In 1982, Benedict was given a terminal cancer diagnosis and was told he had only a short time to live. But during his final moments, he experienced a profound near-death experience that took him beyond this world. In the midst of his struggle, he found peace and was welcomed into a beautiful realm. He met Jesus there, surrounded by radiant love and light. In a powerful vision, Jesus showed him not only the interconnectedness of all things, but also gave him a glimpse of the vast love that transcends everything. This life-changing experience, which he described in great detail, left Benedict with a new understanding of life and the soul's journey. He was miraculously healed of his terminal cancer, and today he continues to speak about his encounter, using his story to inspire others to seek a deeper connection with God. Benedict's encounter left him with a conviction that the healing power of love was real, and it had changed his life forever. For Jeff Olson, the experience was even more personal and painful. In 1997, Olson was involved in a horrific car accident that left him critically injured. Worse still, he lost his wife and youngest son in the crash. Grief-stricken and unable to process the overwhelming loss, Olson found himself having a near-death experience during his recovery. As he drifted into unconsciousness, he was pulled into a world of light, where he was reunited with his deceased loved ones. In this sacred space, he met Jesus, who spoke to him with compassion and understanding. Jesus didn't just comfort him. He shared insights about the nature of life, love, and forgiveness. Olson felt a deep sense of peace that transcended his pain, and the experience led him to heal in ways he hadn't thought possible. He wrote about his journey, sharing his story with others, and found a new sense of purpose in the process. His encounter with Jesus gave him the strength to rebuild his life, not just for himself, but also for the memory of his loved ones. It wasn't just a dream, it was a rebirth. These powerful stories reflect a growing trend in which people who have had near-death experiences, or even moments of intense spiritual awakening, describe encounters with Jesus that deeply impact their lives. But these are not just stories of miraculous healing or newfound faith. These are stories of redemption, second chances, and profound transformations that often lead the individual to live in service of others. So, what is it about these encounters that makes them so life-changing? It seems that the common thread is the overwhelming love and compassion people feel when they come face to face with Jesus. Take the case of Dr. Mary C. Neal, an orthopedic surgeon who was kayaking in Chile in 2001. After her kayak overturned in a rapid, she became trapped underwater for several minutes and was clinically dead. During this time, she had an experience that she describes as a meeting with Jesus. She wasn't just saved from death, she was given a deep sense of peace and love that altered her perspective on life. She recalls feeling an intense sense of connection to all things, as though everything in the universe was intricately linked. When she was brought back to life, Dr. Neal's experience led her to see her life's purpose in a new light, ultimately leading her to write a book and speak publicly about her encounter. She believes that the love she felt from Jesus is the same love that binds all people, and that we are all called to love each other unconditionally. Perhaps one of the most striking aspects of these encounters is how ordinary people from all walks of life are chosen to have these divine experiences. These are not just stories from religious leaders or people seeking fame. They are the stories of individuals who were once lost, struggling, or unsure of their place in the world. In each case, they were given a message of hope and redemption, often when they needed it most. And while their encounters might seem extraordinary to the outside world, for them, these moments were a revelation of truth that completely transformed their understanding of who they were and their place in the grand scheme of things. It's easy to dismiss these encounters as mere coincidence or imagination, but the lasting impact these experiences have on the individuals who live through them is undeniable. Their lives are changed forever, and they often spend the rest of their lives sharing their story with others, trying to inspire hope, faith, and love in the hearts of those who hear their testimony. The messages they carry are not about fear or condemnation. They are messages of unity, love, and truth. They speak of the power of faith to overcome darkness, and the reminder that we are all loved by God, no matter our past mistakes. In the end, the stories of Howard Storm, Mellon Thomas Benedict, Jeff Olson, Dr. Mary C. Neal, and many others are not just stories of miraculous encounters. They are stories of lives that were forever changed by a single moment of divine intervention. They serve as a reminder that the divine is always at work in the world, often in ways that we cannot fully comprehend. And for those who experience these divine encounters, their lives are forever shaped by the undeniable truth of what they have seen and felt. These stories remind us that no matter where we are on our journey, God's love is always available to us. And sometimes it just takes one extraordinary moment to remind us of that truth. Whether through a dramatic near-death experience, a quiet whisper in the soul, or a powerful vision, these divine encounters offer the promise that no matter how lost we may feel, we are never truly alone. But what's the truth behind near-death experiences and these supposed encounters with God? Is it all just a story, or do these things really happen? The reality of near-death experiences and encounters with God is a deeply debated topic. Are these experiences genuine glimpses into a spiritual realm, or are they simply the brain's response to stress and deprivation? Some claim that these encounters are authentic, offering a sense of peace and a connection to a higher power. Others argue that they are nothing more than vivid hallucinations, the product of chemical changes in the brain during life-threatening situations. The question remains, are we truly meeting something divine, or is it all a psychological construct? For many who experience near-death experiences, the encounter with God or a higher being feels incredibly real, so much so that it can transform their entire outlook on life. These individuals often report feelings of unconditional love, peace, and acceptance, as if they've been welcomed into an otherworldly presence. This profound shift in perspective leaves them with an unshakable belief that there is more to life than what we can see. Yet for others, the experience feels more like a comforting fantasy, a creation of the mind in the face of death's terror. Despite these varying interpretations, the impact of such experiences on an individual's sense of purpose and spirituality is undeniable. Scientists, however, argue that these experiences can be explained through natural processes. The brain, under extreme stress, can create vivid hallucinations, such as the sensation of encountering God or experiencing a heavenly realm. These phenomena might be triggered by the brain's release of chemicals like endorphins, or by a lack of oxygen in critical areas of the brain. While this doesn't necessarily disprove the authenticity of these encounters, it raises questions about their origins. Is it possible that what seems like a divine experience is merely a survival mechanism, a way for the brain to comfort itself during the most frightening moments of life? Near-death experiences are some of the most mind-bending, jaw-dropping, and sometimes life-altering events that people can go through. Imagine being on the edge of life and death, only to find yourself floating above your body, traveling through a tunnel, or encountering long-gone relatives in a world that feels more real than anything you've ever known. It's no wonder these experiences have captured the attention of scientists, psychologists, and spiritual seekers alike. But what is really going on? Are near-death experiences a glimpse into something beyond our understanding of life and death? Or are they just our brains scrambling to make sense of an overwhelming moment? Let's start by diving into what near-death experiences are, what they might really mean, and why some of them can leave people feeling more alive than ever, even after coming back from the brink. Could it be that these experiences are telling us something about what happens when we die? Or are they simply our brain's response to extreme stress? The truth might surprise you. Near-death experiences are typically reported by individuals who've come close to death, often after accidents, heart attacks, or severe trauma. The stories are strikingly similar, with people describing sensations like floating out of their body, a strong sense of peace, or encountering a light so bright it seems to pull them in. For some, it's a reunion with deceased loved ones, or even an encounter with what they interpret as a higher power. No matter how different the experiences may seem, many people describe a shared sense of something beyond this world. But why do some people have near-death experiences, while others don't? And more importantly, what do these experiences really mean? What if everything you thought you knew about life and death was flipped upside down in an instant? The science behind these experiences starts with understanding how the brain works in extreme situations. When the body is under severe stress, such as when a person is about to die, the brain goes through a range of changes. For instance, oxygen deprivation is one of the most common explanations for the vivid experiences people have. When the brain doesn't get enough oxygen, it can cause hallucinations or altered perceptions, leading to the kinds of visions and sensations commonly reported in near-death experiences. Researchers believe that the visual cortex, which processes sight, is particularly sensitive to oxygen levels. When it's deprived, it can create a tunnel vision effect, where a person perceives themselves traveling down a dark tunnel towards a bright light. Similarly, the brain's temporal lobes, which are responsible for emotions and memories, can also be affected by low oxygen levels, leading to the sense of peace, or even the sensation of floating above one's body. So, in a sense, a near-death experience could simply be the brain's way of dealing with a life-threatening situation. But it's not just about the brain's response to oxygen levels. There's more to the story. Could the vivid and detailed experiences people report be more than just a chemical reaction? One theory that has gained attention is the idea that the brain might release a burst of endorphins during extreme stress, which are chemicals that can make us feel euphoric and at peace. This rush of feel-good hormones might explain why so many people report feeling incredibly calm or at peace during their near-death experiences. They might even feel a sense of profound connection with the universe or a higher power. These physiological explanations help us understand some of the common elements of near-death experiences, but they don't necessarily explain why the experiences are so consistent across different cultures and belief systems. Why is it that people who have near-death experiences, regardless of their background or religion, often describe similar sensations, like floating above their body, meeting deceased loved ones, or feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Could it be that there's something universal about these experiences? Or is the mind simply following patterns in its response to death? One possibility lies in the psychological theories that help explain why some people experience near-death phenomena, while others do not. One theory suggests that near-death experiences may be a psychological coping mechanism. When a person faces the potential of death, the brain may create a series of comforting, peaceful visions as a way to protect the individual from the intense fear of the unknown. It's almost as if the brain knows that the person needs something reassuring during such a traumatic event, by giving them a glimpse of something calm and beautiful. The mind might be helping the person transition into the unknown with less fear. For others, particularly those with strong religious or spiritual beliefs, near-death experiences might reflect a more personalized view of the afterlife. People who believe in heaven or an afterlife might report encounters with religious figures or divine beings, while those with less spiritual belief systems might describe a more neutral or peaceful experience. This suggests that what people see during a near-death experience may not be random. It could be shaped by their personal beliefs and expectations about life after death. However, it's not just about beliefs. What if near-death experiences also say something about our own perception of time, space, and existence? Another psychological theory posits that when a person's body is under extreme stress, their brain might start to disassociate from physical reality. This disassociation could result in the sensation of floating above the body or perceiving time in a distorted way. In some cases, people report experiencing their life flashing before their eyes, a phenomenon that might be explained by the brain rapidly processing past memories in the midst of a near-death crisis. The aftermath of a near-death experience can be just as life-changing as the experience itself. Many people report profound shifts in their perspective on life, relationships, and even death itself. For some, these experiences can lead to a deepened sense of spirituality or a newfound purpose in life. It's not uncommon for people to emerge from a near-death experience with a stronger desire to live in the moment, cherish their relationships, or focus on personal growth. For these individuals, near-death experiences can be seen as a type of spiritual awakening, a second chance at life with a new set of priorities. But not everyone who has a near-death experience feels peaceful afterward. Some people are left feeling confused, alienated, or even afraid. The vividness of the experience can sometimes make it hard for individuals to return to their normal lives, especially if they've had what they perceive as a glimpse into another realm. For others, the aftermath can involve feelings of isolation as they try to share their experience with others who might not fully understand. Could these dramatic shifts in perspective be a result of an experience that transcends life and death? Or are they simply the brain's way of coping with a traumatic event? The question of whether near-death experiences are real or unreal is one that's not easily answered. To those who have had them, they are undeniably real. The emotions, the vividness, and the sense of peace or awe are deeply personal, making it hard for them to dismiss the experience as mere hallucination. For many, these experiences are transformative, not just physically, but spiritually, leading them to reevaluate what they believe about life, death, and everything in between. Yet, from a scientific standpoint, there are still many unanswered questions. Are these experiences purely the result of brain chemistry and psychological factors? Or could they point to something greater? Does the consistency of these experiences across cultures and beliefs suggest there's more to them than just brain activity? Perhaps, in the end, near-death experiences are both a product of the mind and a window into something beyond our understanding, a mystery that science, psychology, and philosophy may never fully unravel. Ultimately, the power of near-death experiences lies in their ability to challenge our understanding of reality. Whether they are the result of physiological processes or a deeper connection to something beyond this life, one thing is clear: they leave a lasting impact on those who experience them. Near-death experiences remind us of how fragile life can be And in doing so, they often inspire us to live with more purpose, more empathy, and a greater appreciation for the fleeting moments we have. The mystery of what lies beyond death may never be fully explained, but the impact of a near-death experience is undeniably real, changing lives in ways that nothing else can. So, what do you think? Could a man like Elliot Harper really change after all these years of anger and resentment? Is there hope for anyone who's lived so long with bitterness and fear? And what does his story say about us, about how we see the world and each other? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.